Today we're going to be revisiting Super Mario World on the Game Boy Advance. I don't know if some of my recent videos have given this fact away, but I have a thing for playing ports and examining ports and kind of like comparing the differences between original versions of the game and then comparing them to the ports of the game that came after. I like examining like the small differences between those types of games or games that got like slightly different versions on other platforms. Like for example, here we have Super Mario Advance 2, which is actually Super Mario World. It was like the Game Boy Advance version of it. I don't know why, I've always found these like different ports to different consoles and handhelds and such to just be really interesting. I get a little too nerdy with it though, and sometimes I compare the differences in ports of like the same game. So for example, we look at a game like Resident Evil 4. I love comparing the differences of the game on PS2 versus GameCube versus Wii versus the Zebo versus the 360 versus the PS4. The list goes on and on. I have some issues, I know. But hey, the way I see it, in some people's eyes it may be a bit of an issue, but for me, this is what makes me happy. This is what I like doing, so, I don't see a problem with it. You know what I mean? I just noticed that we're not playing this in full screen. I have no idea why I started the game in this mode. I will fix that for you guys. You ready? 3, 2... Look at that, like magic, it looks a lot better now. I've been trying to figure out like a better setup for the camera back here because like, I won't go on the whole spiel here, but basically my desk sucks, and like if I sit up at my desk properly, I'm like, my monitor is literally right in my face, and I hate playing games like that. I like sitting back, I'm the type of guy, I like to be far away from the TV, leaning back on the couch, just like, being as comfortable as possible. That being said, that also means that I'm farther away from my desk, so I'm trying to keep you guys as close to me as possible. Hopefully it isn't too far away. My main concern is the mic, because like, in terms of the video, it looks okay, but the microphone, it's a little far away. And unfortunately, my microphone is attached to my tripod, so there's not a whole lot I can do about that. One thing I've noticed right off the bat is that this version has a bit of screen crunch compared to the SNES original, because, and it's also, it seems like it's rendering the 4:3 image of the SNES original, because if you know it, we're gonna pretend that I didn't die right there. Look, I'm commentating, I'm barely even using any brain power right now. I know we're only on World 1-1, but don't judge me. It's not entirely my fault. As I was trying to say, this version has a bit of screen crunch compared to the original, and furthermore, if you know anything about the original SNES, right, like when we were playing on the CRT TVs back in the day, it was being displayed in a 4:3 aspect ratio. But if you know anything about the SNES, the console was actually outputting an 8:7 ratio. Therefore, the things that we were seeing on our CRTs were actually a little stretched out compared to how they were supposed to look. And funnily enough, that's the aspect ratio that they're outputting here. Well, not necessarily the aspect ratio that's being put out here, because obviously the GBA wasn't just a 4:3, but the image that we would have seen stretched out back in the day, they're using that stretched out image, if that makes sense, rather than basing it off of the native SNES 8:7 aspect ratio and then like putting a widescreen filter on that. I know this may not make sense if you're not familiar with all this, but it's just one of those small things that I just picked up on. I don't know if that's actually the case. It looks like that to me. Like Mario looks a bit fatter. Sorry, Mario, I'm really not trying to diss you. I'm laying out the facts. Mario looks a bit thicker overall, and like, I don't know, like some of the way that certain sprites look, like the dragon coins, they look a lot more like wide on the horizontal axis than they did in the original. Again, I mean, I can't even say that this is nitpicky, because I'm not even nitpicking. This is just an observation. I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to my games. Like anytime I play SNES games, I always make sure that I'm playing on like a pixel perfect mode. Obviously, when you're playing on original hardware, there's only so much you can do about that. But anytime I'm playing on like my SNES Mini, or I'm playing on like an emulator, I always go for the pixel perfect mode, just because when it comes to games, whether they were designed for 16:9, whether they were designed for 4:3, or whether they were designed for 8:7, I like to see them in the most pure form possible that the developers developed the game in and what was intended to be seen. That's part of why I absolutely despise when people stretch out retro games to like 16:9. Like every time I see that, it makes me feel weird and wrong inside. Like, why would you do that to these classic games? There's so many people that play like PS2 games and they stretch them out to 16:9, or God forbid SNES games, which we just finished going over how they were originally meant for 18:7 and then they stretch it all the way out to a 16:9. Do you know how disgusting that looks? But anyway, yeah, I don't know. This honestly seems to just kind of be the same version of the original game. Like, we were playing the Donkey Kong Country GBA version a couple of days ago. And I mean, here you can switch out and play as Luigi, which, you know what, we're going to go over here to the second level and we're going to play as Luigi. I want to see if there's any like differences in his movement, sort of. Oh, wow, yeah, so they totally did the whole Mario Bros. 2 thing, where he has, like, a much floatier jump. Okay, so, yeah, this is interesting. I've played the GBA version of this game before, but not much. I turned it on just to, like, test it out. That one of those things, like, I played a couple of levels, but that was the extent of it. But this is pretty cool. Obviously, in the original, you couldn't do this. It's weird because Mario looked a lot fatter than he should have, but for some reason, Luigi looks, like, deceptively natural in this state. Maybe it's because Luigi was actually developed with the GBA screen in mind, whereas Mario was, like, already a stretched thing, so they like converted it here. I don't know. I'm not trying to get too analytical, or, you know, I'm not trying to observe these things too much, but, you know, when you're playing a port like this, where it's basically the exact same thing as the original, the only differences that you're gonna notice are the small ones, right? The casual viewer, they probably won't even know like half of what I'm talking about, but at the same time, I feel like the type of person that would be watching this video in the first place, or the type of person that would have clicked on this video, is the type of person that's into those small little differences like me anyway. All in all, though, this version is pretty cool so far, I must say. Like, aside from the screen crunch, which the screen crunch on here really isn't bad compared to, like, you know, some of the Game Boy ports that we had. Well, there wasn't even that many ports to the Game Boy, but like, you think Super Mario Land or like Donkey Kong Land, like, there was a lot of screen crunch going on there. But here it feels relatively natural. Then again, I haven't ever really played this game much outside of the SNES original, so I'm not used to the wider aspect ratio. But if anything, it doesn't seem like they took the original game and then gave us more field of view on the sides. It kind of just looks like they took the original 8:7 aspect ratio and then stretched it out a bit. I might be wrong about that, but that's just kind of how it looks to me, at least, considering the screen crunch going on here. But again, I must clarify, I'm not nitpicking, and these things aren't negatives. These are just simple observations that I'm making as I'm playing the game. See, back in the day, I primarily played the SNES version, but I would be very curious to hear from you guys in the comments. Is there any of you where your only or main source of, like, experience with Super Mario World is this GBA version, or maybe, like, another version of the game? Like, I definitely love to hear from you guys, because I always find those things to be interesting, like people that grew up with different versions of the game. For me, personally, I grew up with like the PS2 version of like SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom back in the day, but I've seen some people on the internet where like they grew up with the GBA version of the game, and I actually only just got around to beating that for the first time just a couple weeks ago. It's definitely quite a different experience from the original, I'll tell you that much. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely different. It's like a 2D puzzle platformer, whereas the other one was like, you know, a 3D open world collectathon. Again, that just feeds into my fascination of like different ports and versions of games, because back in the day, like in the early 2000s, late 90s, you had a bunch of these games coming out where they had the same name, but they were essentially different games. Like Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith on the PS2 was like a 3D action game, but then on the GBA, it was like a 2D beat 'em up similar to like a Streets of Rage. One famous example I always run to that's actually a bit more recent, so even some of the younger viewers might be able to remember this, Spider-Man Web of Shadows on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. Obviously, it was a 3D open world action adventure game, but then on the PS2 and the PSP, it was like a 2D beat 'em up. It wasn't like a Streets of Rage type of beat 'em up. It was more just like, I don't know, you run, there's enemies in front of you, you beat them up and you move on. And then on the DS version, it was like a Metroidvania, and the Metroidvania version of the game is actually really good. In fact, all versions of the game are really good. Personally, I grew up with the PS2 version, and then I got to play like the 360 and PS3 version later on. Same thing with the DS version. I didn't get to play that version in particular until just a couple years ago. That being said, I did play a ton of the DS version of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which is also like a Metroidvania, whereas obviously, you know, you have the console version where it's like, you know, that cool like cell shaded look, and it's more like level based. It's not necessarily like open world like something like Web of Shadows, but you know, it's more level based and it's more linear, just focused on the action and such. But then the DS, it's like a 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania, and it is so good. The DS version of that game is so underrated. Like, the people that grew up with it and the people that played it, they know, you know that it's really good. I can't recommend that one enough. Like, it follows the same story, but outside of the story and sharing the same name and, you know, sharing like the multi-dimensional Spider-Man aspect, like the Into the Spider-Verse type of scenario, it is like entirely just a different game, and it is so good. Like, both versions of the game are incredible. If you haven't played either Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, whether it's the console version or the DS version, I can't recommend it enough. It is so good. Fun fact about me, Mysterio is actually one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, and it's because of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Like, before Shattered Dimensions, I knew of Mysterio mainly just because I saw him in one of the comic books that I used to read a ton as a kid, and then he was also in the Spider-Man 2 movie game on like PS2 and GameCube and Xbox and such. But then later down the line, once I played like the DS version of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, I absolutely fell in love with Mysterio as a villain, and he's still one of my favorites to this day. In some adaptations, you know, he's a bit more of just a wimpy illusion guy, but then you have those stories like Shattered Dimensions where they really try to expand him and make him some like literal big bad by the end of the game. Whoa, wait, there's cutscenes in this version of the game? Mario and Luigi have defeated the crazed Iggy Koopa in Castle Number 1 and received Yoshi's friend who is still trapped in an egg. Now they travel together to Donut Land. Whoa, this version has like cutscenes and everything with like added story. That's a theme with these GBA ports, isn't it? That was the same thing in the Donkey Kong Country GBA port. There wasn't really any story in the original one, or not like any cutscenes. But then in the GBA port, they added a bunch of story, and it seems like they did the same thing here. I love how they changed the story in this one, so instead of it just being Mario, like they have Mario and Luigi traveling together on the overworld, and then you can pick like whichever one you want before the level begins. I actually like really like that. I'd be curious to check out some of the other Mario to GBA ports, because I haven't really played any of the other ones either. I know there was 4 Mario Advance games. there's Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, which is technically like Super Mario World 2, and then you got Mario Bros. 3. No, Yoshi, he left me. Oh my gosh, yes, let's do it. We got the cape. Oh, never mind, I just lost the cape. It's probably one of the worst feelings in Mario games. Like, oh wait, no, never mind, we got the cape back anyway. I was about to say, I hate when you like get a really cool pickup and then you just like lose it immediately, but no, we got the cape back immediately. Oh man, the nostalgia is hitting hard right now. You guys ready for this? We run up to the side of the wall, we go up, and we collect a bunch of coins. This is one of the coolest power-ups in Mario, period. I don't care what anybody says. This is so good. You can literally fly. Gotta get the full speed going, and as soon as you go full speed, you can just fly around the place, dude. Super Mario World has not aged a day. This and like just any of the SNES platformers, like they're so good, man. I was talking about it in last night's video, but if you're one of those morons that's like, oh, I can't play an old game because old graphics bad, seriously, just try picking up an SNES controller, just picking up an emulator with some of these old games. You wouldn't believe how much fun you'd end up having after just simply, like, even after a minute. It's not about the graphics, it's about the fun gameplay. As I've said many times before, I love super graphics as much as the next person. I absolutely love when you get games like The Last of Us 2 or God of War with those amazing graphics. Like, I love when we're, like, getting to that cutting edge of technology and we're seeing things with, like, Unreal Engine 5 and all the different, like, particle effects and facial animations. Like, it is absolutely amazing. I could have only dreamed of graphics like that as a kid, you know? Like, Resident Evil 4 was, like, one of the best looking games of all time back in the day. That was one of the main benchmarks for a while of what was possible in, like, a console and just in video games, period. And now we're on to things with, like, Hellblade 2 and all the crazy facial animations and, like, the facial animations of, like, Horizon Forbidden West and just the graphical fidelity overall of games like God of War. That being said, these old games still deserve respect, too. Look, they may be made up of, like, 16, sometimes even 8-bit sprites, but they're still just so much fun. And again, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. But again, all my boomer ramblings aside, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to try out the GBA version of this game. We've been on this trend the last couple days where we just go back and try out these random ports of these games that I've never gotten to play before that are based on games that I otherwise love and have played the original versions of. If you guys have any recommendations on other like ports for me to try, whether it's on like PSP or DS or 3DS or whatever, just let me know. I'd totally be down to try them. But anyway, as always, a massive shout out and thank you to all the patrons and channel members. Thank you to all of you in the low baller tier, and an even bigger shout out and thank you to all of you in the big baller tier, Metal Asking, and Big Daddy Mighty, and the biggest shout out and thank you of all to all of you in the G tier, Rotten Vengeance, and Little Cheese Girl. Thank you guys so much. You guys are literal legends. I love you. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. And be sure to tune back in tomorrow. We're gonna be revisiting a certain purple dragon from the PS1 era. Some of y'all might know what I'm talking about. Peace.